Listening Section 1. In a moment, you are going to hear a conversation between two friends, Mitchell and Caitlin, about accommodation options in Wellington, New Zealand. Before you listen, you have some time to look at questions 1 to 10. As you listen to the conversation, answer questions 1 to 10.
Caitlin, you were born in New Zealand, weren't you?
Yeah, I was born and raised in Wellington. I only moved to Hong Kong when I was about 25.
Wellington? That's perfect. Do you still know the area well?
Sure, I go back there every year or two. Why do you ask?
My niece is planning to go to Wellington to study at university.
That's great. Wellington has some of the best universities in the world, and it's a great place to live.
That's what her parents thought too, and it's very good for the field she wants to get into.
So what's the problem?
We're not sure about the geography in Wellington. Where are some good places to live?
I see. You've picked the right place. Wellington has a lot to offer students in terms of experience. There are so many different types of accommodation to choose from.
Such as?
Well, you could consider a homestay. That's quite popular with international students.
What is that?
It just means that your niece would live with the family in Wellington, in their home. She'd live with the family and get to know the culture a bit better. But it also gives her less independence.
I see. That's an interesting idea, but I think she wants to experience living on her own when she's in New Zealand.
I can understand that. Another option would be to board at the university.
Board?
Yeah, many universities have dormitories where students can live during their studies. They're often on the campus, so they make getting to class a lot easier, and students usually get their own room. The downside is that she would be living with a lot of other people, and she may not get along with them.
I see. What other options are there?
Well, there are hotels or hostels, but these can be quite expensive, especially if she's going to be living there for a number of years.
I don't think her parents would be willing to pay that much, especially when there are other options which sound quite good.
I know some people who do that for their children when they go overseas to study, but I agree, it's unnecessary. The other options are a much better experience for a young adult.
Yeah.
Well, the last option is to rent a place somewhere in Wellington. Many local students would do this, but since the city's so expensive to live in, they usually have to share a house or apartment with other students.
I see. I don't think we know any other people in Wellington, so that may not be possible.
Well, there are a few websites where you can find people looking to share accommodation in New Zealand, so it might be worthwhile just to check and see.
You might be right. I'll definitely pass the information along.
I'd be a bit careful, though. You should check to see what the transportation is like in the area and how far it is from the university. Wellington's a very big city, and the transportation isn't as good as it is in Hong Kong.
That's a good point. I'll be sure to pass that along.
Also, some parts of Wellington can be quite dangerous, especially if you're not used to the city.
I didn't realize that. I thought New Zealand was very safe.
Mostly it is, but there are some very rough areas.
That's a good point. If we find somewhere that sounds suitable, maybe I can check with you first if the area is okay.
Of course, just come by my office or send me an email.
Thanks a lot. I have so much information to pass along to my niece.
Not at all. If she has any questions, you can give her my email address. Tell her to contact me directly. I'm happy to help.
That's very kind of you. Thank you.
You're very welcome. See you later.
Bye.
That is the end of Section 1. Listening Section 2. In a moment you are going to hear a conversation between two colleagues, Jeff and Jessica. Jeff is talking about his interest in Tibetan monasteries. Before you listen, look at questions 11 to 20. As you listen to the conversation, answer questions 11 to 20.
Hello, Jeff. I hear you've got an unusual hobby. Someone told me that you were interested in Tibetan monasteries. Is that right?
Yeah, most people are quite surprised when you say that's your hobby. It's not really a hobby, more of an interest, I suppose.
And so, have you been there?
Yes, that's how I got interested in the first place.
Oh, so can you tell me about it?
Yeah, sure. Actually, it was in 2001. I was traveling around China, and I ended up in a place in Tibet. I didn't really know much about the place, or Tibetan culture, or anything to do with Tibet.
Oh, Tibet was open then?
Yeah, well, on and off open. It was a bit tricky, actually, at the time, but I ended up, believe it or not, staying for 3 years, having just gone there by chance, and I got very interested. I learnt the language. It wasn't even standard Tibetan. It was a bit like a dialect of Tibetan, a bit like Chinese.
Where were you then?
This was in Gansu province in China. It's actually part of, in the Tibetan world, it's known as Amdo, and Amdo Tibetan. It's a bit like Cantonese to Mandarin. The mainstream Tibetan is spoken in Lhasa, the capital, and in this part they spoke a sort of dialect, Eastern Tibetan. So yeah, I ended up staying 3 years, and although I was based in one place, I did a lot of traveling, and the more I traveled, the more interested I got in tracking down the location of monasteries in this area. Some were very difficult to find because there were no books, no maps, precious little information apart from that found in Tibetan books.
Oh, then it must have been really difficult for you to get around.
Yes, but once I started learning how to read and write Tibetan, and speaking Tibetan, and talking to people, I gleaned information from all sorts of sources, then went off traveling, trying to locate them.
Have there been any changes over the years to the way you collect information?
Over the years, it's sort of developed. As I said, I've been doing this since 2001, so I've got a bit more specialized. I've got satellite maps. There's all sorts of technology nowadays, which when I was first there either didn't exist or I had no access to. So I've sort of built on that knowledge.
Oh, so what were your goals in doing this?
Well, my aim is to locate every monastery in that area. It's quite a big area. There's probably at least 1,000 monasteries. Some of them have probably got one person in them, and the biggest has probably got 4,000. Well, 3,000 monks in it. Not nowadays, maybe 1,000 nowadays, and they're located in really isolated places in the Tibetan part of Qinghai, Gansu, and northern Sichuan.
So are you so interested because of religious reasons?
That's a good question. I'm not religious. I'm not interested in Buddhism particularly. I'm not interested in architecture. I think the main reason was, at the time, there was no information about it, and that sparked my interest. I certainly never intended this to happen. I never intended to spend so much effort and time, money as well. It's not cheap traveling around. But it's an interest. Maybe it's a bit like collecting. Once you start collecting something, you want to get every stamp or every whatever. And there's also a bit of detective work involved, finding out. And there's no big list for this. And China tends to be a bit secretive as well. It's a little bit political, and although I'm not political at all, the political situation means that monasteries are a bit of a touchy subject in some areas. And certainly a few years ago, a lot of these places were closed to foreigners. We weren't really supposed to go there.
Oh, so when you showed up, what kind of reaction did you get?
Well, actually, the local people are delighted to see you. The only people you have to worry about are the police. But of course, it depends on where the monasteries are. If it's in the middle of nowhere, there's nobody there, let alone police. But if you're in towns, it's a bit more problematic.
That is the end of section 2. In the real listening test, you would now have half a minute to check your answers. Listening section 3. In a moment, you are going to hear a discussion between 4 colleagues, Miranda, Sunny, Adrian, and Irene. They are talking about the different master's degree programs that they have taken. Before you listen, look at questions 21 to 30. As you listen to the discussion, answer questions 21 to 30.
Nice to meet you three. Listen, I was thinking next year of doing some kind of master's degree. Probably in TEFL, because that's where my experience is. And you all have a master's, in fact, don't you? So I wonder if you could tell me about it so that I can try and make up my mind what to do. Sunny, what did you do? What postgraduate programme did you do?
Well, I did my MA in English language teaching. I did it here, in fact, in Hong Kong, at the University of Hong Kong. That was quite a few years ago now. I started in year 2005.
What sort of stuff did you cover in language teaching?
Well, you see, I didn't have my BA in English language, so I took a number of courses in teaching grammar, teaching vocabulary, teaching discourse in the first year of my MA, and it was part-time, 2 years part-time.
And do you think that's good? Does that work better than full-time?
It worked for me because I was working. I couldn't afford to do a full-time course, so I opted for a part-time 2-year master's program. It was okay.
Yeah, I think full-time is impossible. I had to do part-time as well. I don't know which would be better, but I had no choice because I was working.
And what about you, Irene? What did you do?
I did a master's in education, and I did it online, part-time.
And was online all right?
Yes, it was quite a good program because they had tutors in Hong Kong who would look at the assignment before it was submitted to the university. So that was helpful.
Did you do it in Hong Kong too, Adrian?
Yes, I did it at Hong Kong U.
And what was yours in?
It was applied linguistics.
And what was that like?
It was okay. It covered the same kinds of things: curriculum design, vocabulary, testing.
Was there more theory? Applied linguistics sounds more theoretical.
Yes, it does. There wasn't much that you could directly actually relate to teaching. We never learned how to teach any of the topics. The vocabulary was learning about vocabulary and about testing vocabulary, for example, but not teaching it. Yours was more teaching-based.
Yeah, more teaching-oriented, more pedagogic.
And what were the best things then about everyone's course? What stands out now after the event as being good about your course?
It was actually nice having a part-time course and going every week. I enjoyed going to the sessions. We had sessions twice a week through about a year and a half, and I actually enjoyed going to the sessions and meeting the people.
Makes a difference, doesn't it?
Yes, I thought that was very nice, so I don't think I would like an online one much, because you're much more on your own.
Well, with me, the thing that stands out is the relief I felt when it was over.
Yeah, just getting it.
No, just finishing it. I didn't care whether I got it by that time.
Did you have a sense of working on your own without other people around you?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I didn't, but there was no one around to help.
Was that difficult then?
I don't know. I've got nothing to compare it to. I think the people doing it part-time have to go to lessons in the evening, after a hard day's work. I think that's quite difficult. I couldn't have done that.
But I really enjoyed going to the lessons. That was the best thing about it.
Yes, but I had young kids then. I couldn't have.
Well, I'm glad I had classmates at the time. I remember we had a lecturer who was rather unclear in what she wanted to tell us about.
That is the end of section. Listening section 4. In a moment you are going to hear a lecture given by Mr. Christopher Shepherd about the development of horror literature through the ages. Before you listen, look at questions 31 to 40. As you listen to the lecture, answer questions 31 to 40.
Good morning, everyone. The lecture today is about the development of horror works through the ages. By works, I mean literature or film. Obviously, if we think about the entertainment industry, the scope of horror in fictional worlds is so wide today that we can't hope to have a neat little history in the course of the next 30 minutes. You'll find that we can't go in a geometrical straight line, rather we will meander around the ages. Anyway, I hope to be able to give you a taste of the diversity of the works that we can find through the ages. First, let me turn to defining horror generally, and then more specifically. The shorter Oxford Dictionary defines horror generally as a painful feeling of intense loathing, meaning hatred or repulsion and fear. Applied to literature and film studies, it's important to note that pleasure is involved. The same dictionary considers that a horror film or novel would be designed to excite pleasurable feelings of horror by the depiction of the supernatural or violence, for example. Now we might ask why. Why do readers or viewers get pleasure by watching or reading horror works? Say, why do they obtain pleasure by watching a crazy man with a chainsaw attacking young hitchhikers on holiday? But these questions are addressed in the lecture next Monday. Instead of answering them here, let's go back to the idea of horror works through history. We could start with a brief look at ancient Greece. The Greek poet Homer has a story of how Ulysses, the hero, at sea is faced with sailing past a whirlpool on one side of his ship or a many-headed monster on the shore. A difficult choice. Ask yourselves, what would you do in this situation? The hero chooses to go nearer to the monster than the whirlpool, thus saving the ship but sacrificing some of his crew who are eaten up by the monster. Such situations suggest a pleasurable feeling from violent horror. Some people might find this tame or weak horror by today's standards, but it still shows that the attraction from a fearsome and disgusting story has been long with us. If we want stronger repulsion or disgust, why don't we consider Shakespeare's bloodiest play, Titus Andronicus? Of course, we could say that the impact of the horror acted on stage before our eyes might be more shocking than reading of Ulysses' plight. The plot alone gives an idea of the potential of the action to shock and please at the same time. A Roman general and hero, Titus Andronicus, is the subject of revenge, a common horror theme throughout history. The queen of the Goths, who has been captured with her defeated army, cunningly arranges to have her 2 sons rape Titus's daughter, cut out her tongue, and cut off her hands. She also plots the execution of 2 of his sons by making it seem as if they murdered the emperor's brother, and Titus is tricked into cutting off his right hand to save them, in vain. All this sets the scene for Titus's elaborate revenge on the queen. He invites her and the emperor, who has taken her as a wife, to a feast in his house. There she is tricked into eating her own 2 sons made into a pie. Again, one must ask for next week, what is the attraction of such a play? Why is it still very popular?
That is the end of section 4.